Dr. Willie here. We are on part 2 of Chrononutrakinetics, understanding that when you eat may be as important as what you eat, and possibly even how much you eat. So let's start out with understanding chronopharmacokinetics. Very interesting topic. Chronopharmacokinetics is the branch of pharmacology that studies the fate of drugs in the body as to their absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination. In other words, it is what the body does with the drugs. Pharmacodynamics is the study of biochemical and physiological effects of drugs and their mechanism of action. In other words, what does the drug do to the body? So chronopharmacokinetics means chrono is time, the father of time, if you know any mythology. Pharma, drugs. Kinetics, having to do with change. That is the time-dependent changes in kinetics, which may proceed from circadian variations at each step. In other words, when you take drugs, very well could be as important as what the drugs do. Those variations include absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. In other words, a particular drug's effectiveness or side effects may be more observable based on when it was taken. The amount of drug, what the drug was taken with, etc., all come into play. But so does the time of day you are ingesting the drug, based on our natural daily cycles, such as sleep-wake cycles. And that brings me to Zeitgebers. Zeitgebers it's a German term for time giver. They're external environmental cues, most importantly, light-dark cycles, but also food, temperature, social activity. These all entertain and synchronize an organism's internal circadian rhythm to the 24-hour day. They act as the German word states, timekeepers that reset the biological clock, with sunlight being the primary driver in humans. Light and darkness, social contact or social isolation, being in a noisy environment, a quiet environment, eating, fasting, these are all very important. And believe it or not, that is what my book called The Z Diet is named off of. Z being Zeitgeber. In other words, there are very important things that are not understood or misunderstood or completely missed in the whole world of eating correctly. So let me cover some circadian rhythm examples of drugs. Aspirin, for example, its bioavailability in the morning is twice as high as it is in the afternoon. Chronopharmacokinetics characteristics and researchers in early years recommending morning dosing of aspirin because of this. However, there is evidence, database evidence, that taking it at bedtime lowers the risk of cardiac issues, and taking it in the morning may prevent colon cancer. So the time of day you take aspirin is very important. Are you trying to prevent cardiac disease? Or are you trying to prevent colon cancer? Very interesting. Levothyroxine sodium, which is a thyroid medication, or Synthroid, or any of the thyroid meds for that matter, nighttime dosing lowers TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, the pituitary hormone, more so than AM dosing. Now, does that mean it's working better? That has not been elucidated in the literature. However, that is very interesting. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like Indocin SR. If you have osteoarthritis, taking Indocin SR at night does much better for pain control. If you take an anti-inflammatory like ibuprofen, naproxen, Arutus, any of those in the morning, you are doubling your risk of GI adverse events such as an ulcer or gastrointestinal bleeding. Double it by the time of day you've taken it. Other drugs such as diabetic drugs, blood pressure drugs, cardiac drugs, psychiatric medication, they all have these same issues. Does your doctor talk to you about those? Big question mark. Dot. How about disease states? Did you know asthma, the risk of an asthma attack is up to 70 times greater between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. versus in the afternoon? Why do you think? And I can tell you this, when I did ER medicine in residency, a lot of wonderful young kids came in the early mornings not being able to breathe. There's something to this. Gastric motility. Gastric motility is double in the day versus nighttime. That's why us people in this silly profession tell you to don't eat at night. Good grief. Anyway, that's a different story. Hepatic blood flow, which could also be termed metabolism if in certain sectors, is greatest at 8 a.m. in the morning. It really is amazing how when you eat can be as important as what you eat and how much you eat. So stay tuned for part 3, because we're going to talk about chrononutrakinetics. How does food and what type of food and what macronutrient and what really can optimize your health, your weight, your goals when you focus on not only what you're eating or how much you're eating, but when you're eating. Stay tuned.